Thank you. Thank you. All right. Welcome to Limitless with Shawnalee and the
Did you
Wake
want
Up
to
with Science
you
TV
want to hit
network.
record?
Oh, I did.
You did.
I did. We are live.
You
Well,
are.
we're actually pre-recorded, so welcome.
Yeah.
And we have Nicholas, the gentle giant, with us today, and he is the author of this book. The whole reason why we are here is the giants and the smalls. And so in this episode, we will be talking about the giants and the smalls and really how you can actually take this book and apply it to yourself and to create yourself into your giant potential.
I love it.
So love it. We'll let you talk a little bit about yourself, Nick, which most of you who have been on the network are aware, but if you're not, this is Nicholas T. Smith.
Yeah. So I wrote this book a long time ago, about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, um, after going through some hard times. So it was a bit of a struggle. It was after 2008, after the market crash. Things were tough financially. This is what seeded this book is this experience. I had a coach when I was a real estate broker, and so I had a sense of what coaching was like. And I was thinking, I want to speak. Things were going really bad, so I wanted to become a speaker and a coach. And so I started stepping into that. And I was going through a networking group, and there was this lady named Julie Blake who said, "You've got to meet Steve Hardison." And I didn't know anything about Steve Hardison at the time. I just, knew the name from her. And I said, yeah, I'll talk to him. And so, after the market had crashed, my home was foreclosed on. We were bankrupt. I was getting my food in Utah. It's called a welfare center. And so I was going there to get my food and groceries. And Steve Hardison calls when I'm in the parking lot ready to go in. And so we have a conversation. And so I pause going in and I sit and talk with him for about an hour. And probably one of the most pivotal and impactful conversations I've had in my life, because he just really helped me to see the value I have as a human being, because I felt small. I felt really small, insecure, not sure of my future. There's a question in the book that I plugged in here from that conversation. When he asked, I asked him, I said, "Can you?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "You don't even know what I'm going to ask." And he said, "It doesn't matter what you ask. There's nothing that you can ask that's bigger than me." And so that you'll see that in the book here. That really hit. That really landed with me. I started working for my brother up in Park City shortly after that, driving up 40 minutes in one direction. So I was listening to all these books. I was just looking at these houses on the hill, like, how are they doing it? How are they living, quote unquote, a giant life? Well, I'm not. Listened to Spencer Johnson's Who Moved My Cheese, and I thought, man, I could write something like this. And so that inspired me. His conversation inspired me. I started recording this book as I would drive to work on this recorder. And so every day I'd record it. I'd go home and share it with my kids. And what I wanted to teach them with it was how to create a giant life from the perspective of what I thought it would be like to be coached by a giant, and so I imagined all the giants that I had been inspired by or coached by and started to create it from there. Steve Hardison was foundational in that. But I'd share it with my kids and they started to get the message. I wanted to do it from a space of earning and creation rather than entitlement. I didn't want to imagine that those people on the hill just inherited it, like they had created something and it created that for them. And so that is where I started writing from, is how do you create that when you've never had that before,
Yeah.
And so
how many people can really resonate with that story, because there's so many people who after COVID, right, this post market, like how people are in that space right now, or
still, right now. Gas prices are through the roof. Crazy things that you wouldn't think would happen are happening. And how do you grow inside of that and not lose yourself to, quote unquote, the chaos, right?
Yeah, the chaos out in the world, and really like honing in, like you say, on your giant potential, really coming back to your home, which is yourself.
Yeah.
And, getting out of where, like scarcity, or getting out of fear, or negative opinion, negativity around you, could be any number of things that, you can experience when you're in that space. And then how do you create yourself from that?
Yeah. From feeling small. I felt small. Yeah. I know what it feels like to feel small. It wasn't the first time or the last time I would feel small back then. 2019, I went through it again. I got divorced in 2019, and that was heavy. I mean, how do you pull yourself out of darkness where you wonder if you're going to be alive the next day, kind of a thing?
Yeah.
And so, there are a lot of people right now, if I'm speaking to the audience here, you may be struggling with some really difficult emotions. So you might be at a loss. You've tried everything. You've tried all the self-help courses. You've had coaches. You've done it all, and there's no movement. And you're wondering what's going on. You feel broken.
Yeah.
And so how do you go from that and all that old programming and then create it differently? Because I know it can be done. It's being done.
It's being done.
Yeah.
A lot of the authors, I call them the New Thought authors, but back then, like Dr. Joseph Murphy, The Power of the Subconscious Mind. And so what you speak and what you tell yourself really has an impact on your world. But we've been through like this programming, like you say, outside in the world, where you get like repeated thoughts, or your family grew up this way, or it's always been this way, or like what the media tells you, and all sorts of things, like what we watch and what we listen to also have an impact on us. So you can have like this one thought, like, I'm going to the poorhouse, is just kind of like one of those sayings that you always hear. But then that actually goes in, the subconscious mind doesn't know, what's real and what's not real, and what's a joke and what's not a joke. And so then that's where you can actually change those things that you repeat or say out loud, or that are spoken. And change that world. And so I would love if you could read the book for us, and
I can do
that. I don't know if you've read it online before, but
not in a while. So this will be good.
Yeah.
I'll just dive in. And if there's any part you want to stop on, or if I have some thoughts around why I put that in there, then I'll share that. So, actually this first part, the intro, I wrote this thinking of the universe and the scale of the universe. I don't know if you've seen the videos where they scale out and they show Earth and the sun and the solar system, and then they go out even further, and you just see how much of a speck we are in the universe. And so I was thinking of that in my mind as I wrote the introduction here, is we really are floating through the universe on a speck of dust, essentially, and the idea that there could be planets out there that are bigger than ours, that they make us look like a single speck of dust. So that's where I got that idea and concept from, is I've just been intrigued by that, the scale of things.
And then just like, even though just that you're a speck of dust, like how divine and really how needed you really are on this earth. One of the books that I read a while ago talked about how there is no mediumship that could ever recreate you. It doesn't matter, like if somebody had psychic abilities and could, or that they could clone you, or any of those things. There's only one of you. And so you, in all this vast universe, you are needed here on this planet.
Agreed. Let's
Yeah.
dive in. You ready?
Let's dive in.
All right. Should I throw on the glasses? And
yes, please.
It makes it bigger. So beyond the night sky and further than the faintest star, past the darkest part of the heavens, is a world so big it would make our earth look like a single grain of sand. The inhabitants of this great sphere lived strange lives that were, to a certain degree, like ours. But the most curious thing about them was that some were giants and many were smalls. The giants and the smalls lived amongst each other and shared the world as so many of us do. They breathed the same air, had similar opportunities, and in many ways were alike. However, they were massively different in size. The smalls kept to themselves, eating tiny crackers and pea soup and having small talk. They believed that smalls were small, and born a small is born a small, lives a small, and dies a small. They had strong beliefs about themselves. They never had thoughts of their little neighbors, even in insignificant ways. Smalls were afraid to do brave things because their minds were small. They had always been small, so they went about in a small world, never having the courage to think big thoughts or take big risks. Their tiny feet led them down the same little paths, never brave enough to discover big things that would make them more exceptional in the heart. McBron's Rittenshanks was born into a small family and lived a small, ordinary life. His small friends had a hard time saying such a large name, so he became known as Rit. Rit came from a family with a long history of being small, and as Rit got older, he lived an insignificant life, traveled the same meager paths his parents had taken, and associated with other smalls who lived, thought, and acted small. So, this part here is we have a history that's kind of handed off. And it's almost the idea of it's always been done this way. So let's pass that on. This isn't an attack on anybody's way of being. It's just a recognition within you, within the individual. This whole journey is in one individual. This is within each of us. But the idea that we have old programming that's handed down and there's no questioning of it is, where did that come from? Why do we do this? Small is small. We just do this, right?
What is this? And then you're comfortable. Is that uncomfortable being? You're comfortable with being the uncomfortable. There's something else out there, but are you willing to take those next steps to find what that is?
Yeah.
I think of like comfort zones and how being a small, like that's what having pea soup. You've always had pea soup.
Yeah.
Right? Did you know if there's other types of soup, like bean soup,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, or Soup of Toscana at Olive Garden, like something like that would be phenomenal.
Yeah.
But we have this tendency to just live out our lives kind of unconsciously, not really being aware that there's any other possibility out there for us. We often might think that we don't have a say in our life. This is just the way it is, right?
Just the way it is. And if you don't have anyone around you possibly that have ever gone beyond that, how would you know that you can even create that? Like, oh, it's just for these other people.
Yeah.
Maybe celebrities, and that's just how, that was just how they were raised. Or like you said, the people on the hill, like, oh my goodness, they just inherited that. Or
they're just lucky, right?
Yeah.
We're going to get to that too. So you ready to keep going? Yeah.
Keep going.
Like most smalls, it's hard to get these on with the hat. So I'll just hold them. It's not going to work, man. I could take the hat off too. So totally. Like most smalls, Rit only saw the path he was on and rarely looked up to see what else might be happening around him. One day, a burst of distant laughter high above him had him look to the sky. The giants had always been there, been nearby, but he never paid attention to them. And for some reason that day, the sight of them sparked some fascinating questions. Why are there giants? He wondered. Why are they living such giant lives while I live this small one? How did they become so massive? I mean, think about this with anything. We start comparing ourselves. Why are they having that? And my life is so simple and small and, in a way insignificant, right?
Yeah.
Is it possible for me to become a giant? These were the first giant questions Rit had ever asked. He had once heard that everyone could become a giant, but his parents' words rang in his mind. Giants are giants and smalls are smalls. And that's the way it will always be. So Rit shared his questions with some of his small friends who laughed at him. Smalls were good at belittling, after all. They told him it's not possible to become a giant. You have to come from a certain ancestry or have extra special talents to be giant. Giants are unique, they said. You're just a regular old small. Rit slumped to the curb with his head in his hands. Right, here comes the depression, right? The shame, the anxiety, all that stuff that comes up. Maybe it's easier to be small than to stand out. But inside, he knew he was more than a small. Time
That's
passed.
the solar plexus.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's the solar plexus. That's his gut telling him that he needed to do something else.
Yeah. Yeah. So your gut check, right? I know there's more
Yeah.
in me, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes asking the questions, there's Lisa Feldman Barrett talks about the anxiety comes from our not measuring up to the ideals of others. And depression comes up from not measuring up to our own ideals. And so it would make sense, in this
Mhm.
situation that somebody would start to compare themselves to being accepted and fitting in and not wanting to stand out. And,
Yeah.
don't interrupt things. Don't be different. I think Marianne Williamson talks about it, who are you?
Yeah, she does.
Yeah. So she's got a
Who are
great
you?
quote on that to not be, to play small, right? Is what she says. Who are you to
Yeah.
play small?
Who are you to play small, and then who are you to be? Uh, what is it?
Yeah.
What it a
We're,
lot.
we're doing awesome at paraphrasing.
Yes, but
Yeah.
living up to your giant potential. I think that
Yeah.
there's more fear in that and breaking the norm
Yeah.
than really just getting by and being average or just doing what everyone else does.
Chuck the hat so we can get these on and off easy, right?
Yeah.
Now I feel like the dad in Elf, the movie, when he's
Oh, there
reading.
you go. Yeah. And
All right. So time passed, and while traveling down the same small path he had always taken, Rit saw the giants and asked himself, is this all there is to life? Staying small and afraid, not standing out or being different? Who would want to be small forever? He wondered. Not me, he exclaimed. I want to do more. Rip pondered how he could learn about the giants. He couldn't ask his friends and family, for they were all smalls. And what do smalls know about being giants? I've got it, he said out loud. Who would know more about being a giant than a giant? I know just what I'll do. So the very
some
next
bravery
day,
there.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it took some bravery there.
Yeah, some courage, right? And then also looking at the idea of a mentor, somebody that's doing what you want to do or has been where you want to go is powerful.
So powerful.
Because rather than somebody trying to push you up, it's let's pull you up. Let's show you how to do this, right?
Yeah.
So
It
that
shortens
was
that path.
it
Sorry.
does. That was the reason for having that in there is to look for people that are doing what you want to do. Could you learn from them? Who would you need to learn from? So he packs his stuff, right? He packs some small things into a tiny bag. He grabbed several pairs of his favorite striped socks and his hat, of course, gathered some crackers and a hunk of cheese for his adventure, left the path he had always taken, and journeyed to find a giant. That's a big step right there for people. We're so used to doing our path to step off onto new path, to step into the unknown. This is one of the journeys, is the journey of uncertainty, to step and embrace the unknown. And so there's the picture in the background here of Rit walking on the path, and he doesn't know what's out there. He's just going for it, right?
He's going for it. And that's like the biggest step. That's just right before, like, that's your trust, right? Showing that you have trust in the universe and you have trust in the unknown.
Yeah.
And that sometimes is a big step. And even if sometimes you aren't like 100% certain, but you just know that there's got to be change that needs to be created. And oftentimes it's when we're at our lowest, when, we're sitting down in the dumps or, in that depression and anxiety, and it gets so dark and so black that, that in itself is miserable. So stepping out into the unknown sometimes is easier because then, it's different than what you have always gotten.
Yeah.
And then you have that bravery to take that step forward.
It's where the transformation begins, right?
Yeah.
It's a new path. So as Rit traveled, he made up a song. And as he walked, he sang and whistled the tune. I would like to be with you and you could be with me. We will go on to the moon and see what we can see. When my life gets too hard to do, will you come set me free? And as you find a way to break through, will you turn around and rescue me? Because the way is not found alone, and the only way can be one is by getting to somewhere that you've never known and do something you've never done. So that's the tune for the song, and he whistles this, right? The path wasn't easy for Rit. There were rivers to cross. Rit loved playing in streams, so this wasn't terrible for him. He had forests to trek and long open spaces to cross where the sun beat down on him continuously. The heat at times was unbearable, but after a long journey, every journey being long for a small, Rit arrived at the place where the giants lived. They seemed so magnificent. He sat quietly for a moment and watched as small, fearful thoughts began to fill his head. Will they step on me? Are they going to eat me? He wondered. Who am I to ask a giant these questions? Mustering up a small amount of courage and trusting that he was making the right choice, Rit shook off these fearful thoughts and moved on. So first stance of taking a stance for you, right? Being courageous, being afraid and still moving forward. Courage can only exist when fear is present. So it's like without fear, there's no reason to be courageous, right?
True. True.
So he musters up his courage and starts to climb. He approached the giant. His whole body shivered. I wanted to portray for the kids the energy of it so they'd recognize this, because sometimes kids don't have words. Even adults don't have words for anxiety and what they're feeling. His whole body shivered as he looked up. The giant's head was well above the clouds. His clothes were larger than life, similar to Rit's, but substantially bigger. The giant's brown vest and white shirt were all that was visible through the clouds. A giant green hanky hung from the giant's back pocket. It looked like an enormous flag blowing in the wind. Rit approached the massive being and began to climb. He hung on and climbed and climbed and climbed. As he reached the giant's shoulder, Rit could no longer see the ground below. His head spun. His knees wobbled. He held onto the giant's shirt collar to keep from falling. He had never been so far above the ground and was hanging on for dear life. So going out of your comfort zone like that, right? You're like, man, I am so stretched out of what I'm used to.
Yeah.
You're just hanging on, right?
You're just hanging on. And I kind of actually saw that flag. It's like that sign, right? The sign from the universe of, hey, come right here.
Yeah.
This is the one that you want to speak to. It's like we receive so many signs from the universe, or,
Yeah, I like that.
And just following it. And then that was who we found. And then, having that courage to be able to climb. And at that point, you're just committed. It's more than just, okay, I'm going to just check and see. You're in that full commitment of, I'm going to see this through.
Interested, right? Like, so the word interest, it means in between. And so being interested means you're in between something.
Yeah. And
so to move from being interested to committed is that now you're no longer in between. You've chosen.
Yes. So, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gathering as much courage as he could, Rick climbed up the giant's ear and yelled, "Mr. Giant!" There was no answer. Rick tried again. "Mr. Giant!" The giant looked around and said, "Who was that? Who said that?" Rick yelled in his ear again, "Mr. Giant!" The giant roared again, "Who is that?" Rick covered his tiny ears. The giant's voice shook his entire body. He could hardly understand what the giant was saying because the sound was so immense. Okay, so I want to pause here. In the original, when I wrote this, the sound was so big it couldn't enter his ears. And a lot of times when a mentor speaks, we have a hard time hearing it because we don't have the languaging for it. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes we'll hear our mentor speak and they'll say things and we just glaze over because it's like, I can't understand because like you're speaking a language that's outside of what I'm used to, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where that part comes in, is that the giant's voice was so loud, he couldn't really understand it, right?
Ooh, I love that.
So that's why that's in there. "Mr. Giant," yelled Rit. "I'm a small." The giant said, "A small? Here?" His voice vibrating and shaking Rit. "What are you doing here?" "I came to ask you how you became a giant." The giant, moved by the courage of this tiny being, invited Rit onto his hand. "What a brave thing to do," said the giant. Rit sat against a fold in the giant's hand and looked up into his enormous eyes. The giant cleared his throat, a little choked up by Rit's bravery, and began to speak in a quieter tone. "I'm impressed by your bravery. I haven't seen a small in a very long time. I'd be honored to share my story with you." So Rit leaned forward as the giant continued. "My parents were giants." And so contrast this with what Rit was grew up in, his environment versus the giant. Okay.
Yeah.
My parents were giants and they knew the path to become a giant. They loved to explore the possibilities in the world around them. They dreamed impossible dreams and always thought of others and how they could best serve them. My parents' hearts were enormous. They were constantly thinking or looking for ways to improve themselves, serve others, and make their world a better place. Their giant feet took them down paths of endless possibility, and that helped them to reach their stature. Rick gasped and leaned in even closer. My friend, I need you to know that I was born a small just like you.
Mm. I love that. And he embodied those qualities that you talked about. And as you were reading, I wanted you to know that you embody those qualities and that you really serve others. I mean, you have that big giant heart, and that is, I think, like your number one goal is helping and serving others. And
it's getting more and more clear too. The more I step into this journey, is that's really what it's about. Is, if I serve one people or 1,000 people, it doesn't matter. But start serving, right? There's a power in giving, right? That maybe isn't talked about, and this might be a little, I don't know if it'll work for the book, but they say that the chemical response in the body of giving is similar to sex and food.
Oh, yeah.
So whether it's forced or not, it shows up in the body. Research shows that it shows up and fires the same parts of the brain that are associated with those two things. And so there's power for the person, whoever's giving. There's always at least a chemical reward and a drive to give because it feels good, right?
Yeah, and you get, I always said, you get so much more of a reward than, actually like what you're doing for that person or how you're helping that person. I think the giver gets, so much more.
Yeah.
It's so the gift is giving, is you receive that gift by doing it. And it's also in the energy of expansion.
Yeah.
And expands you versus contracting or keeping you.
Yeah. Because when you get in that dark space, it's a lot about what's going on in us, and we forget to give, which is it's a way out, right? It's a way out of that. Yeah. So at first, said the giant, I didn't think I could measure up to my parents' stature, even though they taught me their ways from childhood. It took me years before I finally believed. When I finally started doing what they had told me all along, you know what happened? Rit looked at the giant straight in the eyes and asked, "What?" Well, I began to grow. What do you mean? Asked Rit. The giant said, "You see, giants think," so Rit has no concept of this, right?
Yeah.
He has no concept of growing into a giant. So the giant said, "You see, giants think extraordinary thoughts, speak significant words, and do and see remarkable things. As I began to learn, my hearing improved and my vision expanded. That's what is magical about this world. By listening to my parents and doing what they did, I started to grow." Rit's thoughts were racing. Could this be true? This was madness. A small became a giant merely by thinking differently and making new choices. That's the difference between the giants and the smalls. Did that mean he could become a giant? There's only one way to find out, Rit thought to himself. Will you teach me how to become a giant? Rit asked. Wow, said the giant. This is a big thing you're asking me, and I don't know if you're up for the changes that will come if you go down this path. You're asking me to help you grow in a way you don't fully understand. How can I know that you will do what it takes to grow? Rit got on his knees, hands clasped, with a single tear streaming down his cheek. He said, "Mr. Giant, I came here to learn about giants. I come from a long line of smalls."
Felt that one.
Man, I'm tired of living such an insignificant life. Like if you want to know kind of what I was thinking when I wrote it,
Yeah.
that's me, I believe I'm capable of more. I want to prove to myself and to the other smalls that anyone can become a giant. Will you please teach me? This small had come all this way and risked his life to learn something new. The giant's eyes watered. He closed his eyes for a moment, brought his hand close to his face, looked intently into Rit's eyes, and said, "Okay, I'll teach you what I do, but becoming a giant is up to you." Rit jumped up and down on the giant's hand nearly falling off in his excitement. Man, I get emotional reading these. Like,
Yeah.
um, here he was, a small, being taught by a giant. He would be able to prove that he was capable of more. His exuberance caused the giant to smile. He looked at the giant right in his enormous eyes and said, "My name is McBronze Rittenshanks, but you can call me Rit." The giant said, "I, my new friend, am Remerus Ekaritz, and you can call me Remy." Remy placed Rit on the ground and began to walk away. "Where's he going?" thought Rit. Remy
Yeah.
kept going, getting further away. Rit yelled to him, "Remy, wait up. I can't walk as fast as you." Remy didn't hear him and kept walking. Rit ran as fast as he could to keep up with the giant. He was jumping and dodging as he ran with all his energy. Though Remy seemed far away, Rit wasn't about to miss his opportunity to learn from a giant. He's willing to do whatever it takes to learn, right?
Yeah.
Remy walked and Rit ran for what seemed like an eternity. They came to the edge of a large cliff. Rit was out of breath and exhausted as he collapsed at Remy's feet. Remy sat down on the ground next to him. Rit yelled, "What are you doing? Don't you realize I'm just as small and can't walk as fast as you? I barely made it." Remy said patiently, "Yeah, but you made it. A small would have stayed where I left you. A small would have gone home or complained about being left behind. You didn't. You
Mhm.
ran. You ran with everything you had to stay up with me. You were committed. That is a very giant thing to do." I wanted to
Yeah.
pull in the word commitment, right? The word commit means to do. Steve Chandler, another inspiration, he talked about that. That it's not about what you say, it's what you do. So if you're not doing something, you're not committed to it. And so it's
Yeah.
really that simple. Because if you were
That's
committed, you'd be doing it, right?
yeah.
Do you have some thoughts come up as you?
Yeah. Even taking that a step further is what you're devoted to. And devotion exceeds all of that. Like you will do it no matter what.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter if there's reward in it. It doesn't matter if there's fame in it. It doesn't matter if that all the reward you ever got was just for you.
yeah,
That you're devoted to that path and that you're committed to seeing it through, which sometimes people would call insanity or being obsessed or
yeah, yeah,
thinking other things. You can have other people come into where they tell you that those dreams that maybe you'll never make it. And I just seen a thing from Ed Milet the other day saying those people, those voices were sent to you to see if you can overcome them. And so here he is. He almost got left. He's not even hearing those small voices that he heard at the beginning of the story.
yeah, yeah.
He's just going forward and just running forward with that path and just, no, I'm going to see it through.
And no obstacle is going to stop me. I'm going,
Yeah,
right?
keep going.
As Rick caught his breath, they both looked out at the cliff. Remy seemed to be enjoying the view and asked his new friend, "What do you see?" Rick said, "I see a cliff, some plants, and the sky." Remy asked him again, "What else do you see?" "Nothing," exclaimed Rit. Remy laughed and placed Rit on his shoulder. He stood up. A vast ocean spread out in front of them as far as the eye could see. Rit could smell the ocean air and feel the breeze. It was the first time in his life he had seen such an amazing view. Remy asked him, "Now what do you see?" So Rick couldn't speak, right? The view was so breathtaking that all he could do was look. Remy said, "Rit, a giant sees what a small might never see. A giant sees the beauty in everything. While a small misses out on seeing the splendor that surrounds them, a giant sees opportunity in every moment, and a small only focuses on his or her problems. Rit looked up at Remy and said, I want to see what a giant sees and do what a giant does. The sun was going down. Remy told Rit, go home and think about the lessons you've learned. Come back tomorrow. He carried Rit back to where they had met, and Rit headed home. That night, as Rit slept in his small bed, he had giant dreams for the first time. So the standing on the shoulder of a giant, that comes from the idea of Steve Hardison putting me on his shoulder in that parking lot, right? I was seeing my problems, and here's a guy that puts me on his shoulder and stands up, right? And I start to see the world a little differently. It took me 12 years to get to here, and there's still more to come, right?
Yeah.
But that journey wouldn't have started without somebody like him putting me on his shoulder. Or, Dina Layton was my first coach, and she put me on her shoulder, and so it's all these people that just help us to see it a little bit differently from what we're used to.
Totally.
And so
and see that giant potential in you already.
Yeah. We just don't, we get so blinded by what we're seeing. We think our reality is our reality and that it might not change, but man, somebody stands up with you on their shoulder, so to speak. And that all shifts. You start to see possibility, start to have hope for life again. Right.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that.
So the next morning, as he sat up in his bed, he banged his head on the ceiling. He fell backward and his arm broke through the window. His small bed smashed to pieces beneath him. What's going on? He howled. During the night, he had grown. By thinking giant thoughts and dreaming giant dreams, he had actually grown. He stood up from his broken bed and hit his head on the ceiling again. He ran to the front door and squeezed out, breaking the door to smithereens. Rit ran as fast as he could to the land of the giants, stopping every giant he saw to ask for his new friend, Remy. He approached Remy's home and pounded on the door frantically. Remy, he yelled. Remy, open up. It's me, Rit. Remy opened the door, casually looked at his friend. Wow, he laughed. You've grown.
Yeah.
I know I've grown, said Rit. My house is destroyed. I don't fit it in anymore. I don't know what to do. The life you knew will never be the same, said Remy. And this is just the first step in becoming what you say you want to become. It's up to you whether you want to keep growing. What would you like to do? Rit closed his eyes, shrugged his shoulders, and sighed. Kind of that. Like, what to do, right? And it's like, yeah.
Yeah, I can't go back, but I don't know what's forward.
Yeah. He's shaking his head back and forth. He looked up at Remy and said, well, I don't want to go back, and I definitely don't want to stay like this. I'm neither a giant nor a small. It's kind of a medium, right? Some of the kids in schools called him a medium. I want to keep going. Satisfied, Remy smiled and invited his little friend inside. Let's eat some breakfast, and we'll get to our next lesson. So the cool thing on this is that Rit grew in his sleep. He didn't have to know the mechanics behind his growth for him to grow. He fell asleep and let go, and then had dreams, and he held on to these dreams. And in the giant dreaming, he started to grow, but there was a surrender.
Yeah.
And so this is a section on surrender, on letting go, because you don't know how it's going to come about. You just have the vision that it's possible now.
Ooh. Yeah. And you've already put your orders there into the universe. Now you're letting go, you're surrendering.
Yeah.
But then you're also become aware. You're no longer unconscious. You have that awareness. And once you become aware, you cannot go back to that unconsciousnness.
Yeah.
Once you're aware, then that takes that responsibility to move forward. It goes out of all the other things. It's like I can just pretend I don't know.
Yeah. Kind of messy too. I mean, your old house is falling apart because you outgrew it, but you're not quite where you want to be. And so that can be really challenging for people too, as being in between, right? And
not giving up.
Yeah. I mean, you think about a journey for me to go 13 years to today, 12 years to today, right? And there's still more to do. But at any point I couldn't have gone back to the life I was in before.
Yeah.
So there was no going back for me, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So that's the idea, is once you're committed to growing in your life, then you kind of get this lifelong commitment to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Continuing to take those steps. And you don't always need to know the entire path. He didn't know the entire path. He just knew that next right step.
Yeah.
And that was to follow his mentor and to just dive in and really just surrender to the process.
And trust. Yeah. Trust it.
Mm-hmm. Trust it. Mm. Okay,
Well,
keep going.
Rit walked into the biggest home he'd ever seen. It was a home built for a giant. Remy invited him to sit at the table. Rit had never seen so much food. He was used to small pea soup and crackers, and here in front of him was more food than a small could imagine: fruits and pastries, fresh meats, and the most excellent vegetables. Remy instructed him to eat all that he wanted. There was more than enough. Rit ate and ate and ate. He ate the fruits, he ate the vegetables, he ate the meats and the pastries, and as he did, he grew a little bit more. He asked, "Why am I growing?" Remy said, "Rit, a giant sees the abundance of the world. He is grateful for the things that a small doesn't even see. A giant knows there's more than enough of everything for everyone, and a small does not. There's enough to share, and if something runs out, I can produce more." And I use that word carefully, produce, right? I can produce more. Rit thought about what Remy said and finished his meal, his belly bulging, his belt buckle loosened. He'd never thought about abundance. Smalls were always saying there wasn't enough of anything. He'd never considered the idea that if one thing ran out, he could make more. He was beginning to see the plenty that surrounded him. I mean, I think about growing up. We grew up pretty poor, and there was a lot of talk about what we couldn't do or what we didn't have. And so you start to see that. You start to notice that and perceive that, and then start to act as though that's the case. And truly, we live in an abundant universe. I mean, I didn't have to pay for oxygen that I'm breathing today. That's a powerful thing. I didn't have to create the earth that I woke up to. I didn't have to create all the minerals and resources that are in it. Right?
No. Yeah. And then looking around like, okay, you can get down on your circumstances, but then you know, there's somebody who does not have what you have.
Yeah.
Or going out and looking at all the blades of grass. Can you count all the blades of grass that there is in the universe? I mean, you know, there's so much. And abundance not only is just monetary things.
Yeah.
Abundance is an abundance of love, an abundance of joy.
Yeah. Yep.
In many, many different forms. And I love that in here too, he's grateful and he gets to learn like, no, the more that you're grateful for things, the more that it comes to you. Having that grateful heart, a grateful heart is magnetic to bring all of your desires to you. But really it takes seeing and how he saw in his world what he already had. Right. And so it wasn't like that greed that he wanted more. Oh, I just want more. Give me more. Give me more.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So he stood up from the table and walked to the window. "Remy," he asked, "how is it that you have so much while the smalls have so little?" "Follow me," Remy said. He walked steadily outside to a large garden. Rit followed. He had never seen such enormous plants and fruit trees. There were rows and rows of fruits and vegetables and a small farm filled with animals. Rit asked Remy, "What are you doing?" Remy said, us, we are working in the garden. This is where the food you were eating came from. A giant works to earn the things he or she has. And you, my friend, will be working with me today. We'll be pulling weeds and taking care of the plants, the fruit trees, and the animals. Suddenly, Rit noticed not only the plants, but the weeds. They were gigantic. How in the world could a small pull such big weeds and take care of such a large garden, he thought. Remy handed him some gloves and started working. Rit did too. He tugged and tugged on those weeds. At first, they wouldn't budge. His hands hurt and were swollen and blistered. A giant beetle jumped out, and Rit fell over backward, trying to get out of the way. He started laughing as he realized it had no interest in him. So Rit had never worked so hard in his entire small life. The task felt impossible. But the more he worked, the stronger he got, the easier it became, and the bigger he grew. They spent the whole day working. Rit was covered in dirt and sweat and smelled worse than the animals. You did well, Remy said. It was hard for you at first, but the more you did, the better you got. A giant knows that when he starts something new, he won't be very good at it. If he's willing to keep doing it, his skills will improve until one day he can do it without thinking.
Mm.
So the idea of our brains being designed around that, the ability to automate things, that the more we can automate, the more we can do. And that's kind of Alfred North Whitehead talks about that that's the goal of everything, is to get to that point that we can do things without thinking. And the brain's designed around that. So when we start doing something new, it's really hard. It's challenging. We have to earn it.
Yeah.
Until eventually it's automated. It's not hard. They say on average it takes 66 days to create a new behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And it could take up to 260 days.
Yeah.
But you stick with it, right? In my book, The Art of Accomplishment, I used to say that in order to get what you want out of life, you've got to be willing to suck at something long enough to get good at it, right?
Yeah.
This is a variation of that statement.
And allowing yourself to try new things, because a lot of people will start things, but they don't continue because they expect themselves to be good at everything.
Yeah.
And then allowing yourself to suck.
Yeah. Go ahead and suck. It's a good
but it gets stronger. Yeah.
So here's the part from Steve Hardison. This is what was plugged in from that conversation. Remy, can I ask you something? Remy said yes. Rit said, can you? Yes, Remy said before Rit could finish. Rit looked at him confused. How can you say yes if you don't even know what I'm going to ask? Remy said, there's nothing you can ask that's bigger than me. I can do anything you ask. The question is, will I? Rit thought about that. There's nothing this giant can't do. That sounds impossible. How can he do everything? He was so stunned by Remy's answer, he had forgotten what it was he was going to ask. Rit was still thinking about that, what Remy had said when Remy spoke. Rit, you have that same gift. In fact, all smalls and giants can do anything. Smalls tell themselves all the reasons why they can't do something, and that keeps them from becoming a giant. And that's, Steve Hardison later clarified. He said, it's not that I can do anything from a space of arrogance. It's that I have the ability to do things. And if I can't do it, I can enroll others to help me do it. And I think that's powerful too, because sometimes our vision isn't just about us. It's about enrolling others into our vision and having them help us. And truly, there's nothing we can't do.
True. So true.
Yeah.
And then asking for that help, right? And asking others.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, you go. I'm good.
Good. When you have more than one, then it becomes even more powerful.
Yeah. There's a collaboration. But even getting to the idea, if you believe that you can't do something, you won't put energy into it. If there's no vision, you can't see yourself on the other side of that vision, or imagine yourself, probably a better word than seeing, right? As some people don't see their visions. So if you can't imagine yourself there, it's hard to have hope. There's a lot of research around hope, that hope comes when you have vision, and then hope is a generator of activity. Because when you have this idea that you can create something and that you have the ability to create it, then you'll actually take action to create it. But if you feel despair when you think of your future or your vision, you're not going to put energy into it. You're like, what's the point?
Yeah, you block yourself every time.
Yeah. So I like to hit on emotions in this a lot, anxiety, depression. There's a section here that we'll read right now that goes into that. I was diagnosed in 2017 with generalized anxiety disorder, and I was trying everything I could to change and transform, and it was challenging. Today, I feel anxiety at times, but nowhere near where it was back then. A lot of it comes from this, and then other tools that I've learned along the way around it, but it's something that needs to be addressed. It's so taboo to talk about mental illness or anxiety or depression. And I want to make it mainstream. Like this book brings it up. Right.
Yeah, totally.
So in this section, this is why I put this in here. It's kind of an odd placement of it, but I thought I go through this. My kids are going to go through this. How do we help our kids and bring it up as a conversation? Do you ever feel afraid? Do you ever feel sad? What do you do with it? Because many of us are doing that as adults.
Oh, totally.
Right? So it opens
Yeah.
the door for that dialogue, that conversation. So Remy and Rick continued working the garden into the woods. In their deep conversations and hard work, they lost track of time. The sun went down, and it was time to head home. As they walked through the forest, Rick couldn't see his hand in front of his face. He cautiously felt his way through the trees and vines. Rick's pants snagged on a thorn, and he fell behind. He heard a flutter. His heart started pounding, and his stomach got tingly. A twig cracked nearby, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He imagined all of the frightening things that could be around him. Suddenly, something brushed across his face. He screeched, swinging his hands wildly in front of him to get away. He broke away from the thorn and started running wildly through the trees. He wondered what kind of creature was trying to get him, never realizing that his frightening encounter was just a leaf hanging from a branch. Rick could hear Remy walking in front of him, but couldn't see him. He followed as quickly as he could. It felt like he was walking forever in the darkness, but he kept moving. He didn't want to be left behind. As he caught up to Remy, tattered from the woods, Rick said, short of breath, "You didn't seem afraid as you walked through that. You just kept going." Remy turned. "Rick, I do get afraid occasionally, but a giant keeps moving and doesn't allow fear to keep him from doing what he can do. Giants know that allowing fear to overtake them can make them smaller." This was a new thought for Rick. He knew he could grow, but hadn't considered the idea that fearful thoughts could make him shrink. Smalls allow their imaginations to create scary stories about all the bad things that could happen. Giants put positive thoughts or things in their minds and move forward despite their fears. A giant knows that all fears are stories that we've made up. We can make the stories as scary or as beautiful as we'd like. If I'm in a place that I don't know or that might be scary, I make up a positive story in my mind and things turn out just fine. That was a relief to Rick. He liked the idea of making up new stories and certainly didn't want to shrink. Making new narratives sounded fun. So instead of imagining all the scary things in the darkness, he simply made up a new story. In place of terrifying creatures and monsters, he pictured happy little animals playing hide and seek in the dark. He imagined them laughing and telling stories with thoughts of him joining them in the silliness. And as he visualized this, he grew. Rick worked in every moment to do his best in everything he did. He worked every day at becoming a giant. In time, he built an enormous home, planted himself a prodigious garden, and began sharing his adventure with other Smalls, as many of the Smalls wondered what happened to Rick after they discovered his house in shambles. Many of the Smalls learned from Rick and also became giants. Rick had a lot of adventures with his friend Remy and learned the ways of the giants. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of energy and effort for him to choose each day whether he was going to be a small or a giant, whether he would do giant things, ask giant questions, make giant decisions, or continue playing life as a small. In the end, Rick grew and grew and grew and became a giant among giants. The end. Or is it? Right? This may simply be the beginning of your adventure. Will you be a giant or a small? The choice is yours. Here we go.
I know. Oh, like I'm in like tears, and I'm pulling up the book that I purchased from you when I first found this, when you first came out with this, and in it you put, "In Japan, flaws are celebrated, and here's to pouring gold into our flawed parts as we make the giant journey." And at that point,
Did I write that?
you wrote that. You wrote that to me, and I have my name signed in here because this one is my copy. And
Yeah.
it was when I was down and just learning, how to come out of that smallness, healing myself, after my divorce, and
Yeah.
and really finding what it is of my giant path. And so I am so grateful that you read that. And I love all the commentary in between it and the thoughts behind it, and really just diving in and understanding that so people can apply that at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's not funny. It's interesting to see it evolve. the journey that started out with the book, and then it evolved into our programs, the 12 journeys. And so that's where you really get a sense of all of the steps that we go through every time we're trying to grow. And it's not like we get there and we're done. It's we'll get there and then we'll find another area where we feel small and we'll do the journey all over again.
Yeah.
The other thing it is, and the other thing with the book is it's an individual journey. Some people are reading this, and I've had some reviews online on Amazon where, it's pegging one group against another or causing one group to assimilate to another, or they don't fit in. And it's not about that. The book is about the internal journey that each of us takes when we're trying to reach our potential, that we're going to battle internal stories. We're going to battle our past. We're going to battle trying to fit in. We're going to battle, not feeling good enough. We're going to battle fear and anxiety. And then when we get to that, we're going to go after our vision and embrace uncertainty and abundance and surrender and learn how to nurture and take care of our garden, so to speak. And then give back, at the end of the fruit of giving back, leaving a legacy for the world. Like what message do you want to leave behind?
Yeah.
So they just all evolve from there.
And I love that you put in the piece with the mental health, because that is needed. Our kids need to know and need to understand on how to overcome these things, and leaving therefore a map so that they can see, and then they could create their vision and really create themselves into who they are. Like that seeing, that's like the third eye, seeing who you are and seeing you in your giant potential.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah. It opens the conversation for parents, teachers to talk about stuff like that. And maybe even to do their own healing. A lot of, parents, we weren't taught that, it wasn't discussed. They just suck it up and move on. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And then move past those layers or those stories or the things. Like, we are the creators, so we can actually change that story, and we can go back and, through gratitude. I love that that's part of the journey too, is through gratitude, you can actually go back and actually see that those things that maybe held you back or you thought were like the worst part of your lives, they actually brought you the most growth and maybe weren't as bad as you had created it to be.
Yeah, just a story, right? I mean, this doesn't discount any events that happen in people's lives, but what we carry forward a lot of times are not the traumas, so to speak. We carry the traumas in our body, the event, but the story is often carried, and so learning to work with that, open up to that has been powerful, and so, it's good.
I love it. I love it. Yes. So what you tell yourself, like over and over, it has an impact. Like thoughts become things. And, what is that story, or, saying those affirmations, doing the things like waking up and envisioning yourself in your giant path.
Yeah.
Or going to sleep with your wish fulfilled.
Yeah.
And, I love that you share that journey so openly with everyone, and how you create your vision and sharing your journeys on how you go through life and navigate it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. It's fun. It's hard.
Yeah.
Fun and hard.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. For those that are watching too, as a gift, if they'll reach out to me and message me, I'll set them up on Stretch Revolution, the 12 journeys, because that'll take them through the 12 journeys in their entirety. And that has all the webinars, the daily emails, the meditations that you listen to before going to bed. And we'd love to give that as a gift for those that are watching if they'll reach out.
So, I love that. Yeah.
Is that fair?
That's fair. I love that. That's amazing. Yeah. And join us in the tribe of giants.
Yeah, please do that. That'd be amazing. We got a great community there. So a lot of people doing what we're doing. Did you have other thoughts that came up as you were listening to the story?
A lot of emotions.
Yeah.
I definitely I felt the story in my own life. And, even from when we first met to now, and seeing like that growth, but that there's more growth and there's more of the path, and embracing that uncertainty and allowing yourself to expand and really be rooted, like take it through. I'm all about the chakras, but
Yeah.
that idea when it comes through the crown all the way down, like, seeing it and speaking it and filling it with your heart, and then
Yeah.
embracing your confidence, and then the creativity, and then you get to the root chakra and being really rooted. And the root chakra is bringing it into the physical world. And that's when you start to see, and that you have embodied that journey, is when you start to see it on the physical reality and the creation of things. And when you get that enough energy to like that thought, or this vision of making this book a movie, it's going to be here in the physical world.
Yeah.
However, that comes to pass, right?
And I don't know how.
To that.
Yeah.
And letting go of that how,
Yep.
but staying grounded and being rooted into that vision, is that it becomes a part of you. And then, like you said, those creations then take on their own creation themselves.
They do. Yep. Like kids, they start telling you what they need. And so, they take on a life of their own. It's interesting. You wouldn't think that about a creation, but it does it. So,
well,
cool.
This is a beautiful creation, and love the Tribe of Giants, love the book, and love that you lift up everyone that you meet, and that you really do embody everything that the book has, and that you lift up people and you're here to serve. So,
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for this show. Thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Thank you for coming on. And this is beautiful. So
you're welcome.
Thank you all at home.
Thank you.
Hope you have a good night.
I will. You too. All right.